In our always-on, hyper-connected world, it feels like there's this constant pressure, right? This pressure to be doing something, creating something, achieving something. The message is just everywhere. Optimize your time, grind harder, hustle. But have you ever stopped to wonder where that idea even came from? Okay, let's really dive into this, because the history of how we think about work is definitely not what you'd expect.
No, seriously, think about it for a second. You finally get a free afternoon, you sit down on the couch, and instead of feeling relaxed, this wave of guilt just washes over you. You start running through a mental list of all the things you should be doing. If that sounds even a little bit familiar, you are not alone. And that feeling, it's right at the heart of what we're talking about today.
And this quote right here, this is basically the modern anthem for that feeling of guilt. This tweet from Elon Musk just perfectly captures the mindset that glorifies overwork. It turns it into a badge of honor, like it's a requirement for making any kind of impact. It's this core belief that your value is directly tied to your output, and that rest is some kind of luxury you just can't afford if you want to be successful.
So let's put a name to what we're all living through. Many people call it the age of hustle.
But look, this isn't just about working hard. Hustle culture is an entire belief system. It's a culture that equates being constantly busy with being a good person, with being virtuous. It's this idea that if you're not totally exhausted, you must not be trying hard enough. Your entire sense of self-worth gets all tangled up in your professional achievements.
But here's the crazy part. This way of thinking is incredibly new. For most of human history, the idea of glorifying work would have sounded absolutely bizarre. In fact, for thousands and thousands of years, the exact opposite was true. Work wasn't a virtue. It was seen as a curse.
The ancient world had a completely different take on labor. In the Hebrew tradition, hard work was literally God's punishment for Adam and Eve's screw-up in the Garden of Eden. The ancient Greeks, they saw it as a brutalizing activity that actually destroyed the mind and spirit, something only fit for slaves. And the Romans, well, they held manual labor in such low regard that the ultimate life goal was to retire into a life of leisure.
The very language they use tells the whole story. The ancient Greek word for work, ponos, actually came from the Latin word pone, which is the root of our modern words pain and punishment. Think about that. Work wasn't just unpleasant. It was linguistically, conceptually tied directly to suffering.
So here's the key takeaway. There was this massive, stark division. In ancient societies, your status wasn't defined by how hard you worked, but by how much work you didn't have to do. Leisure wasn't laziness, it was the mark of a free, virtuous, and wise person. It was the whole point, the reason the enslaved majority had to labor in the first place.
Okay, so if work was a curse for millennia, what on earth happened? How did we go from work is pain all the way to rise and grind? Well, a massive cultural and religious revolution happened that completely flipped the meaning of work on its head.
So during the Middle Ages, the Catholic view was that work was, a basic necessity to avoid poverty and the sin of being idle. The ideal life was a life of contemplation, like a monk. But then came the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, and leaders like Martin Luther and John Calvin introduced these revolutionary new ideas. They argue that all work, even tough manual labor, was a way to serve God. It was a divine calling. And suddenly, your job wasn't just a job anymore, it was a moral duty. And even more radical? Worldly success and making a profit, that became seen as a sign that you were one of God's chosen few.
This whole new theology created what the sociologist Max Weber famously called the Protestant ethic. And these are its core principles. Diligence and punctuality, they became moral virtues. Deferring gratification, reinvesting your profits instead of just spending them, that became a religious duty. And work itself, became the most important part of life. This ethic didn't just change how people thought, it laid the perfect ideological runway for modern capitalism to take off.
So now we can really start to connect the dots. A religious idea from 500 years ago didn't just stay in the church. Nope. It bled out into the wider culture and has been passed down for generations, eventually becoming the secular, everyday pressure we all feel today.
Let's just trace this evolution real quick. In the 16th century, the Reformation gives hard work a moral purpose. Then, you get the Industrial Revolution, which takes that ethic and applies it to the factory floor. Discipline and efficiency become the new gods. Fast forward to the early 20th century and you have management theories that basically treat workers like cogs in a machine. And finally, in our own time, the tech revolution and social media have just supercharged this entire history, creating a 24/7 digital world that glamorizes overwork and gives us the hustle culture we know and, well, that we know today.
Okay, so this deep history helps explain the culture around us, but it doesn't totally explain that feeling inside of us.
Why does that guilt about resting feel so real, so physical? Let's take a look at the science behind it.
It's a really good question, isn't it? Our bodies and our brains desperately need rest to function, so why do we fight it so hard? Well, the answer is all about how our brains have been wired and conditioned over time.
What's happening in your head is a direct clash between your biology and your culture. When you finally rest, your brain's default mode network kicks in. This is the part that's crucial for creativity and deep thinking. But if your entire identity is wrapped up in doing things, your brain literally flags this downtime as an error. It activates the same parts of your brain that monitor moral rules, making you feel like you're doing something wrong. Then you add in a dip in dopamine, that feel-good reward chemical, and a nervous system so used to stress that it mistakes stillness for a threat, and bam, you've got the perfect recipe for guilt. It's not a personal failing, it's just neural conditioning. And this, right here, is the single line of code running in the background of our cultural operating system. From school grades to job promotions, we are taught over and over and over again that our value as a person is directly proportional to our output. So when the work stops, our conditioned brain kind of panics, fearing that our worth has stopped too.
But what if this entire way of thinking is just wrong? What if our deeply ingrained beliefs about rest are not only a pretty recent invention in human history, but also just fundamentally unhealthy? Let's explore a new way to think about it. This comparison really gets to the heart of it. The old view, the one that makes us feel so guilty, sees rest as the enemy of progress. It's something you only earn when you're completely burned out. But the new, and I think much healthier view, reframes rest as an essential, non-negotiable part of the cycle. It's not wasted time, it's a strategic investment in your future performance, your mental clarity, and, yeah, your creativity.
And this analogy is just perfect. We can all understand this, right? You wouldn't get mad at your phone for dying when it has a 1% battery. You know it needs to be recharged. Rest is simply our biological and psychological recharge. It's not an indulgence, it's just necessary maintenance.
So I just want to leave you with this final thought. In a world that is obsessed with doing more, faster, and better, what if the most radical, and maybe even the most effective, act of productivity is to consciously choose to do nothing at all? To just allow our minds and our bodies the space to recover, to reflect, and to renew. Because peace isn't something you earn through exhaustion, it's something you find through rest.